You think you've discovered my secret now? Well, I didn't poison anyone, it only makes you all weak. That's serving as a revenge.
The small village of Umula had many food vendors, but none could match Mama Bintu's Indomie. People swore it was the best they had ever tasted. The sauce, the spices, the way the noodles melted in the mouth, it was perfect. Every evening, her food stall was packed. The smell of garlic, pepper, and sizzling onions filled the air, drawing people like moths to a flame. "Ah, Mama Bintu, you don't know what God has done for you," a customer laughed, licking his fingers. "This your Indomie is from heaven." Mama Bintu smiled as she stirred the steaming pot of noodles, her calm eyes watching the bubbling mixture. She had been selling the same Indomie for months, and her customers always came back for more. No matter how full they were, they would wake up hungry for it again. It was addictive. Too addictive. At first, no one noticed. They just knew that after eating Mama Bintu's Indomie, they felt lighter, different, satisfied, but always craving more. Then, the changes started. People who ate it daily began losing weight, rapidly. First, it was just a little. "Ah, Mama Chike, you're looking slimmer these days," someone would say. She would laugh, adjusting her wrapper. "Maybe it's all the walking I do." But then, it got worse. Faces thinned. Skin became paler. People's clothes started hanging loosely on their shrinking frames. Yet, they couldn't stop eating it. In fact, the weaker they got, the more they craved it. They would dream about it at night. Wake up with their mouths watering. Some would sneak out of their homes at odd hours, just to get a plate. And Mama Bintu? She kept serving them, calm, smiling, stirring her pot. Watching. Waiting. One evening, a young man named Kelechi sat at the food stall, staring at his plate. He had been eating here for months, but tonight, he felt strange. Something in the texture of the noodles felt off. He glanced at the others eating around him. They were shoveling food into their mouths hungrily, not stopping to chew properly. His stomach tightened. Why are we all like this? He watched as Mama Bintu moved gracefully, her hands stirring the noodles, her face expressionless. Then, something clicked in his mind. Why does she never eat her own food? A chill ran through him. He dropped his fork. That night, Kelechi had his first nightmare. He dreamed of a pot full of moving creatures, writhing beneath the sauce. He woke up drenched in sweat. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. As the village grew weaker, as people kept coming back for more, Mama Bintu continued to stir her pot, her calm eyes watching everything. She had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for the perfect time. Because soon, very soon, they would know the truth. And by then, it would be too late. The village had changed, but no one seemed to notice. People were growing thinner, weaker. Their cheekbones sharpened, their ribs became visible, yet they felt no pain, no concern. All they wanted was Mama Bintu's Indomie. Kelechi was one of them. At least, he had been. He had eaten her food for months, just like the rest. And at first, he had been happy. But something felt different now. It wasn't just the constant craving. It was the way his hands shook at night, the way his stomach twisted when he hadn't eaten for a few hours. He felt like a slave to the food. And when he looked around, he realized, so did everyone else. Men, women, even children. Their hollow eyes, trembling fingers, restless energy, as if something inside them was slowly eating them away. Yet, they kept coming back. Kept devouring more. Something was wrong. And he had to find out what. That night, Kelechi waited. He hid in the shadows, watching as Mama Bintu packed up her stall. The village was silent, the moon casting long shadows over the dirt road. Mama Bintu worked calmly, unbothered. She cleaned the table, stacked the plates, and then, without hesitation, she covered the pot, but left it outside. She didn't take it into her house. She didn't lock it away. She left it, sitting right there, on the stove. Kelechi's pulse quickened. This was his chance. When the last light in the village went out, when the night swallowed the streets in darkness, he moved. Silent as a ghost, he crept toward the pot. His breath was shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. The pot was warm, as if it had just been used. His hands trembled as he reached for the lid. One deep breath. Then, he lifted it. Kelechi froze. The Indomie inside wasn't still. It was moving. His stomach churned as he leaned in, his eyes widening in horror. Beneath the layer of thick golden sauce, something slithered. Thin, pale, and wriggling. He staggered backward, his throat tightening. Then, as if sensing the air, one of the creatures pushed through the noodles. A worm. Fat. Bloated. Crawling out from the food he and the entire village had been eating. Kelechi clamped a hand over his mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. The pot was infested. This wasn't Indomie. This was a nightmare. The village had been consuming worms, disguised as food. 4 months. His entire body shook. How? How had no one noticed? Why was no one sick? And why was it so addictive? His stomach twisted painfully. He had to get out of there. Without thinking, he placed the lid back over the pot, making sure everything looked untouched. Then, moving as fast as he could without making a sound, he slipped into the darkness. He didn't stop running. Not until he reached home. Not until he slammed the door behind him and collapsed to the floor, his entire body trembling. He could still see them. Still feel the crawling sensation under his skin. The village had been poisoned. And no one even knew it. Kelechi had uncovered the truth. But now came the hardest part. What was he going to do about it? Kelechi couldn't stop shaking as he stumbled home. His mind was racing, and his heart pounded as he replayed the image of the wriggling worms in the pot. The village had been eating worms, and they didn't even know it. The truth hung heavy in his chest, but he couldn't keep it inside anymore. He had to tell someone. Someone who would believe him. As he reached the edge of the village, he saw Ifeoma walking to her house. He ran up to her, grabbing her arm urgently. Ifeoma. I need to talk to you. Kelechi's voice was breathless, filled with panic. She turned, her eyes full of concern as she took in his disheveled state. What's wrong with you, Kelechi? You look like you've seen a ghost. Kelechi barely took a breath before he blurted it out. Mama Bintu. She's been feeding the village worms. I saw it with my own eyes. Ifeoma blinked, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. Worms, she repeated, her voice skeptical. What are you talking about? Kelechi grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes wide with fear. I saw it, Ifeoma. I went to her shop last night and looked inside her pot. It was full of worms, alive, wriggling in the sauce, hiding in the noodles. She's been poisoning us. It's not Indomie, it's worms. Ifeoma's face softened with a mix of concern and disbelief, but she didn't pull away. You're sure? I swear to you. It's true. Everyone who eats that food is getting weaker and addicted to it. They don't even realize it. Ifeoma was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right. If you're right, we need to tell the others. But we can't do this alone. Kelechi's heart sank. He had hoped someone would believe him, but the truth was so unbelievable. He wasn't sure how others would react. Would they think he was just trying to cause trouble? But Ifeoma was already moving, calling over 2 other villagers who were trusted and respected, Mama Grace, a strong-willed woman in her 50s, and Elder Chika, one of the oldest and wisest men in the village. After hearing Kelechi's story, they were shocked, but they knew something had to be done. This is serious, Kelechi, Mama Grace said after a long pause. If this is true, the entire village is under Mama Bintu's control. We need to take action. Elder Chica nodded gravely. We cannot allow this to continue. But we need proof, not just accusations. We need to confront her directly. The group gathered, their anger and fear growing with each passing minute. They decided to storm Mama Bintu's shop the next morning, before any more harm could be done. The next morning, the village was different. It was as if the very air had shifted with the knowledge of what was to come. Kelechi stood at the front of the group, his heart racing. His stomach still churned with the images of those worms, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. But there was no turning back now. The group moved toward Mama Bintu's stall, with determination. As they neared, they could see Mama Bintu, already serving customers. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but there was something unnerving about her calmness, as if she already knew what was coming. Open the pot, Mama Bintu. Elder Chica's voice rang out, filled with authority. Mama Bintu's eyes flickered briefly to him, but her smile didn't fade. What is it now, Elder Chica? Her voice was smooth, too calm for someone in her position. You've been poisoning this village, Mama Bintu. Kelechi shouted, his voice full of fury. We know what's in the pot. We know what you've been feeding us. Her smile faltered, just for a moment. She glanced at the pot, then back at the angry villagers. You think you know everything? Her voice was cold, but there was a flicker of something darker in her eyes. But the villagers were done waiting. They pushed forward, some grabbing sticks, others shouting in anger. Open it, they yelled in unison. Mama Bintu's eyes narrowed, and she realized the truth was out. Her calm facade slipped. She took a step back, looking for a way to escape, but the villagers were too fast. They grabbed her, pulling her back toward the stall. Let me go, she screamed, trying to twist free from their grip, but the crowd was relentless. Her eyes darted around. There was no way out. Kelechi's heart pounded as he watched Mama Bintu try to escape. He was almost too late to stop her, but he held her firmly, forcing her to the ground. You're not getting away, Kelechi growled. With the lid off, the villagers saw the truth. The worms, the writhing creatures in the sauce, this was what they had been eating. For a long moment, the entire crowd stood in silence. Some looked like they might vomit. Others simply stared, their faces filled with horror. But then the rage exploded. She poisoned us, someone screamed. She made us eat this filth. More villagers ran toward her stall, grabbing sticks, ready to take violent action. Kelechi backed away, watching the chaos unfold. You've discovered it, haven't you? She said softly, almost amused. You finally figured out what's been in that pot all along. Kelechi stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. You've been feeding us worms, Mama Bintu. You've been poisoning us. You're responsible for this whole village being addicted to your lies. Mama Bintu stood up straighter, her eyes hardening. Poison, she said with a bitter laugh. You're all just too weak to see the truth.
You think you've discovered my secret now? Well, I didn't poison anyone, it only makes you all weak. That's serving as a revenge.
With one swift movement, she turned and tried to run, bolting from the stall in the direction of the village exit. But the crowd wasn't about to let her escape. Kelechi's hand shot out, grabbing her arm before she could get far. You're not going anywhere, he growled. She struggled against him, pushing and twisting, but the villagers quickly surrounded her, pinning her in place. She was caught, unable to break free. Let go of me, she screamed, thrashing against their hold, but the villagers dragged her back toward the stall. No more running, Kelechi said, his voice hard. You're going to tell us the truth. Mama Bintu's face twisted in defiance. She turned to face the villagers, standing unafraid. She had no intention of backing down. Fine, she said coldly. You want the truth? You're about to hear it. But before she could say anything further, her face softened, and her voice took on a different tone. Her eyes narrowed, and she began speaking, but the words were not meant for the villagers, they were for herself. Flashback. The memories flooded her mind, sharp and painful. She could still hear the sounds of her father's screams, the cries of her mother as they were beaten, her family torn apart by the village that had once been their home. Years ago, she had been a child, a daughter, a sister, just like any other. Her family had been happy, though poor. But that happiness had been stolen from her the day her father was accused of a crime he didn't commit. The village turned on them. They believed the lies, and with that, they destroyed her family. Mama Bintu could still see her father, beaten to death by the very people who had once called him a friend. And then, her mother. She had fought to defend him, but in the end, she was murdered in cold blood, in front of Mama Bintu. She could still remember the face of the man who had struck her mother down, the way his eyes had been empty, as if they'd never cared. She had been alone, broken, and the village had gone on, pretending nothing had happened. But for her, everything had changed. She had sworn revenge on the very people who had stolen her life. She worked in silence, gathering the ingredients, learning what she could. She had no intention of letting anyone know what was coming. Worms, hidden in the food, disguised as something everyone loved. She had watched them eat, her hands trembling with satisfaction as they devoured what had been meant for them. The revenge felt sweet, but bitter, too. Back to the present. As the flashback ended, Mama Bintu's eyes returned to the villagers. Her expression was one of cold triumph. "I watched my father die because of you," she spat. "I watched my mother fall, and no one did a thing. You did this to me. You think I'm sorry for what I've done? Well, I'm not. Not one bit. You wanted to destroy my family, so I made sure you felt it too." Her voice dripped with bitterness, her eyes burning with anger. The villagers stood still, their hands still gripping their makeshift weapons, but there was no more rage in the air, only shocked silence. They had been so focused on the worms, the betrayal, it never occurred to them how deep the hurt ran. Mama Bintu had suffered. She had carried the weight of that pain for so long, and now the villagers were finally learning why she did what she did. Elder Chica was the first to speak. He had been silent through her entire confession, processing her words with a heavy heart. "We have wronged you, Mama Bintu," he said quietly. "We've destroyed your family, and we failed to see the pain we caused you. But revenge, it never heals anything." The villagers looked at each other, guilt settling into their hearts. What they had done to Mama Bintu, to her family, it was now laid bare. The anger that had burned in them was now replaced with remorse. Elder Chica stepped forward, holding out his hand to her. "We can never undo what's been done. But we can help you rebuild. We'll give you land, a place to live. Let's end this cycle of hatred." Mama Bintu stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. But finally, she nodded. "Fine. I'll accept your offer. But know this, you can never undo the damage that was done." And so, with a silent agreement, the villagers began to help Mama Bintu rebuild. The land was hers now, a place to start anew, far from the past that had haunted her. As the days passed, the village found its peace again. The wounds of the past were not forgotten, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The village had learned the true cost of revenge, and now they would work together to heal the scars left behind.